Welcome to Awakened Titans podcast with Lily Patrascu, mind-blowing conversations with influential business titans sharing how you can manifest abundance, love, joy, success through quantum awakening, quantum manifestation, quantum healing, quantum miracles, exponential business growth, and innovative products and services. Discover how to create $1 million podcast in today's session with Kevin Palmieri. Kevin Palmieri is the founder and co-host of the Next Level University podcast. Early in his life, Kevin found success, but after a brush with near suicide, he realized he wasn't living a life he truly wanted. He became passionate about self-improvement and decided to make it his purpose in life to impact as many people as possible by becoming a role model, podcaster, and speaker. He has succeeded to make his podcast one of the top 100 with almost 1,800 episodes and 1 million listens in over 170 countries. He has taken his life to the next level and achieved both personal and professional success. First question is, what's the secret to your success?
First of all, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I would say the secret is probably just wild consistency. At this stage, we've done an episode every day for the last 3 years, and you don't get to 1,800 episodes by skipping one. So the thought process has always been, if we just keep showing up and we just try to get a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better, eventually I'm sure some people will find us. And I think that one of the reasons a lot of people aren't successful is because they quit long before they start to see the results. And unfortunately, with any business or anything, weight loss, a relationship, it takes time for all the messages that you're sending to potential partners to get responded to. It takes time to go on the dates. It takes investment to pay for dinner or whatever it is. And hopefully, eventually it pays off. So yeah, I would say that the consistency is kind of the biggest thing for us that I think has set us apart from other podcasters or business owners.
Thank you. Tell us about your journey and what awakened you to your titanic power, and how did that lead you onto creating $1 million podcast?
As you mentioned in the bio, in the introduction, I was somebody who looked like I was very successful in my mid-20s. I was making good money. I was in really good shape. I just won a bodybuilding show, so I was in the best shape I'll ever be in. My girlfriend at the time was a model, new apartment, sports car. I had all the external measures of success, but internally, I was wildly unfulfilled. I was self-conscious. I had no self-belief, no self-worth. So I ended up finding podcasting, and then I ended up having suicidal ideations because I loved podcasting so much, but I felt like I was stuck in this old life having to do this job, and I was never going to be able to do what I loved, and I was going to be stuck there forever, and everybody would be disappointed in me if I went all in on my dreams. So the pivotal moment for me was sitting on the edge of a bed contemplating suicide, realizing that there's really nowhere else to go from here. Either I go through with this thing that I don't want to do, or I figure out what's the light at the end of the tunnel and what's the thing that I'm going to do moving forward. Reached out to one of my friends, who's now my business partner. He gave me some really sage advice, and I ended up leaving my job in 2018. So it was really the roller coaster of finding success, losing all the success, finding what I love doing, finding what fulfilled me, and then going all in on that and trying to figure out how do we make this any level of successful or sustainable.
Thank you. Tell us more about how did you manage to become such a successful podcaster?
In the beginning, for us, everything was all about understanding the audience. Just like any other business, for us, it was, okay, who's going to listen to the podcast? Who is our audience? What are the type of titles that would work? Who are the guests that they would like us to have on? We did a lot of market research around who the audience was, to the point, Lily, where I literally would give out my phone number to people and I would just hop on FaceTime with them just to get to know them. I didn't have anything to sell. I wasn't making any money. I just wanted to know who our audience was. So I think one, audience understanding and audience awareness was huge for us. The other thing that I think has really, really helped us is we understood early on that the podcast is a great opportunity to make a community, but you have to create the container. So we've had a Facebook group for the last, I don't know, maybe like 5 years, and there's 700 and something people in the Facebook group, realizing that yes, the podcast is obviously a big thing, but you have to have somewhere for people to go after they listen to the podcast. If you don't, they're just going to kind of disappear. And especially as a show that might do 1 episode a week, what is your audience supposed to do for the other 6 days a week? Well, they're going to go find another podcast, or if you have a Facebook group, they might join there. We worked really, really hard on getting a little bit better every day, video quality, studio setup, traveling to interview guests, trying to get bigger guests and better guests, researching the industry. The simplest answer would be it's really the thing that I have focused on most over the last 7 years, more than anything else. It's been the obsession, for lack of better phrasing, and we've just focused on small improvements over time. And now you're seeing it 7 years in, but 2 years in, 3 years in, 4 years in, you couldn't really see anything. We still weren't successful, I would say.
Thank you. When you do the group, don't you find that people tend to like do business amongst themselves? And then how do you actually benefit from that? Do you offer them products and services yourself as well?
So in our group, nobody does that. We're very blessed where everybody is they're there to just learn and grow and evolve. And I would say over the last 5 years, we've probably only kicked like 5 people out of the group because they were breaking the rules of the group. And even in our Facebook group, no, we don't really talk about our products or services. Very much for us, the ultimate goal of the Facebook group is it's a very good landing spot for anybody who listens to the podcast. And goal number 2 is to get them to come back to the group tomorrow so they can get value. Occasionally, if we have like a live event or something coming up, we'll talk about it. But we're very, very light on promotion in the Facebook group. We're thinking more of like the long game of, if I never talk about something in the Facebook group, that's totally fine because the Facebook group will grow to a larger amount. And then, yeah, if somebody asks, I'll tell them. But we are very light on promotion in terms of the Facebook group. And that might be weird. I understand a lot of people, that's not the way they do it, but that's worked really well for us. And that goes back to the audience, right? Our audience does not want to be sold to constantly. So if we are doing that, we're probably losing members, and hanging on to listeners is one of the hardest pieces.
Thank you. How can entrepreneurs create $1 million podcast?
You have to understand that it is probably going to take more time, energy, effort, and focus than you thought in the beginning. Yes, podcasting is kind of the sexy thing, but it doesn't mean that you're just going to step in and everything's going to go and it's going to crush. One, you have to have a niche. So a lot of people come to me as a coach who works with podcasters and they say, well, this is my idea, tear it apart. And usually what I'll say is it's very hard to have a podcast that is just having cool conversations with cool people because it's really hard to make money that way. So what I would say is if you're a coach, if you're an entrepreneur that has a product or a service, if you're ultimately a problem solver, make sure your podcast is about the problem that you solve and solve it for free on the podcast. Then have a bunch of aligned things that ultimately lead to products, services, or coaching. The majority of the clients I've worked with, us included, the money we've made is from coaching, products, and services. We don't do ads. We don't do sponsorships. We don't do affiliates. Yes, you can make money that way, but it's really hard to make meaningful money until you're in the thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of listens. But if you have a product or a service, or you're a coach, you can start monetizing your podcast pretty quickly once you start to build even a small specific audience. So I would say that niche, go in with this is the problem I solve and this is how I do it, and then have somewhere at the bottom of your business where you solve that problem in exchange for money.
Thank you. Do you have any strategy for how do you connect with clients that are, let's say, coming on your podcast? Are they typically the types of the clients that would actually purchase your coaching and services, or are you aiming for those that are listening, or both?
For us, it's always been listeners, But for many clients, they use their podcast as a networking opportunity because it gives you access to people that you might never have the opportunity to network with. So it really depends on, are you trying to, if you're a real estate agent and you have a podcast, yes, it can help you with your listeners, but yeah, if they're local, it might help you. If you have a course, it can help you no matter where they are. If you have group coaching or one-on-one coaching, it'll help you. But if you're looking for investment or you're looking for people to buy into your business, the people that you have on the podcast are most likely going to be the ones that do it. I think it's easy to lose sight of it, Lily, because even right now, I am talking to you. I don't know how many people are listening. I don't know how many people will resonate with my message, but I do know I have an opportunity to talk to one person face to face and hopefully have a meaningful conversation. So that's advice I always give to podcasters. Yeah, you're talking to an audience. And when you go on another show, you're talking to an audience, but there's always somebody in front of you that you're talking to. And those connections might go further than any connection you get from an audience member. So just don't forget to use those as opportunities. So yeah, it's both depending on the show and the product services outcome. But I think most people underutilize the one-on-one conversation with the guest.
Thank you. Do you find it more lucrative when you are a guest on someone else's platform, on someone else's podcast, or do you find it more lucrative when you have your own podcast and then you attract clients from the listeners and also from the guests themselves?
Having your own podcast makes it easier to get on other podcasts. So I would say having your own is really going to help you become the expert in the eyes of your audience. Going on other people's podcasts is going to help you become the expert in the eyes of people that don't know you yet. And then if they do like you and they like your message, they'll come over to your container. They'll see, oh, wow, they have 100 episodes talking about marketing, sales, business, dentistry, plumbing, whatever it is. And then, if anything, they're going to look at you more like an expert because you have all of that content. So it's a great question. I would say if I was to split the amount of money we've made through the business, it's probably close to 50-50 between our audience and then me having the opportunity to connect with other audiences through podcast guesting. It's probably split pretty close, 50-50 or 60-40 guesting, I would say.
Thank you. Do you find that it's better to have a podcast where you are the only speaker and you are going to have, of course, listeners interested in that topic? Or do you find it's better to have a podcast where you have guests that you invite to speak? And is that a better way of creating $1 million podcast?
It's a great question. I feel like every question is loaded because there's two ways I go with every answer. I would say one of the best ways to grow your show is to have guests on. And if you're looking to do products or services or coaching, or if you want to be the problem solver, I think solo episodes are more valuable from a monetization standpoint. Usually what works really well is a split. So I'll tell clients, if you're going to do an episode every week, you're going to do 4 episodes a month, do a guest episode, solo episode, guest episode, solo episode. The guest episode is hopefully to bring in new eyes, people that just don't know you yet. And then the solo episode is an opportunity for you to flex your knowledge and to have some high quality call to action. It's hard when you interview a guest for 45 minutes and then you say, hey, if you're struggling with whatever, make sure you reach out to me. When you have a guest on, you're usually trying to promote your guest. So you're not going to do your calls to action. But when you do a solo episode, you can literally reverse engineer, this is the problem I'm going to solve. And then when you get to the end of the episode, you can say, hey, if you resonated with what we talked about today and you're finding that sales is really something you're struggling with, I actually could help with that. Here are the 3 products we could help you with. You can click the link in the show notes and it'll take you right there. So guest opportunities are usually really good for growth and new eyes. And I found solo episodes are really good for if you're trying to get to somebody to move to the business.
Thank you. What are the best marketing tools to use or techniques in order to increase listeners?
Obviously, all the social media platforms, right? Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Instagram, all of them, is the more you can be on, the better. And I know it's a pain in the butt. There's a lot of schedulers out there where you can use a scheduler to send out your social media content. There's a lot of places that will, through AI, break up your content. Opus Clip, there's a million. Riverside does it. There's a bunch of different places there. The thing that doing is not a lot of people are doing one-on-one conversations. I think a lot of people are thinking of marketing as I have to get as much content out there as possible. I got to promote the podcast, promote the boom. But there's a lot of people that you could reach out to right now and start a one-on-one conversation with that you don't know where that one-on-one conversation is going to go. We had a lot of people that I talked to in my DMs who eventually became clients. And then those clients created the opportunity for us to make money and then pour more into the brand. So if there's any underutilized marketing strategy, I think it's word of mouth from the host to the end user. One of the best ways to grow your show is word of mouth. One of the best ways to get somebody to share about you is to have a one-on-one conversation connection with them. And I went to Podcast Movement, which is a big podcasting conference recently. And they said right now, outside of word of mouth, the best way to get found is to be on YouTube. So if you're looking for new podcast listeners, one of the best ways to do it is to take your episodes, record the video, and then put it out on YouTube as long form content, because people will find it. And then when they're doing the laundry or they're doing the dishes, they're driving, they'll listen to your podcast. The podcasts are secondary activities. Most people aren't just sitting in front of their phone listening. They're doing the dishes, doing the laundry, exercising, driving. So if you can take somebody from an initial focused thing like YouTube and then bring them to the podcast, they'll probably listen to it more. So those are a couple things I'd start with.
Thank you. What about Reddit or Quora or places like that? Is there any way to use them in order to massively increase the number of listeners and watchers?
I'm sure there is. I haven't done it to the point where I could lead anybody effectively. That's where it's hard because there's so many ways to do it, and you can spread yourself too thin trying to figure out how to do everything. So even if you were to pick 3 platforms and then make sure you're having one-on-one conversations, I would say you're probably better off than 90% of podcasters. And the important understanding that I always try to throw out there is when you're just getting started, doing the bare minimum is enough. You don't have to have a great mic. You don't have to have a wonderful backdrop like Lily does. You don't have to have a studio like I do. But as you grow, we have to focus on improving a little bit. So if you're doing the same social media content today as you were doing a year ago, that might be one of the reasons why social media isn't working. So that's another piece that I throw out there is the platform is only going to matter as much as your content is good. So focus on increasing your content, the quality of it, the quality of your interviews, the quality of your guests, because that's never going to go out of style.
Thank you. How can entrepreneurs find the right guests for their podcast?
Ooh, there's a lot of really good places now. There's Podmatch, there's Matchmaker, I think there's Podbooker. There's a lot of really good places to get guests. And then the other thought is you got to get creative and you got to start thinking outside of the box. So for us, it was easier in 2018 to get people to come on if you just DM'd them on Instagram. Now everybody is getting infinite messages on Instagram. So figuring out, okay, does this person have a marketing person? Could we have somebody on the show that is an aligned guest that is friends with another aligned guest, that's friends with another aligned guest that might introduce us to somebody that we want to have on? That is one of the things that we did. Is one of our first big guests we ever had on was Lori Harder. Then we went to an event that she hosted and we met her husband, Chris Harder. Then he came on. And then when we would message people, we would say, we've been lucky enough to have Chris and Lori Harder on. And that helped us increase our social proof and our credibility. So at the beginning, it's probably start with Matchmaker, those types of places, because those people want to be on shows. It's easy enough. And then as you get consistent and as you get better as at an interviewer, then you can say, okay, let me start reaching for people that might take a couple months to get back to me on. Once you get one of those, you just make sure that every time you send a message, you say, yeah, we were lucky enough to have this person on. hopefully that increases the likelihood of a bigger quote unquote guest coming on.
Thank you. What's the best process to use in terms of podcast guesting? Or let's say you having guests on your podcast. The reason I ask is because I've been on some podcasting pre-calls, and what I found is that I'm finding myself, I'm being sold to, and I haven't even had the podcast yet. And I wonder if this is, and they are saying, we've sold multi-millions and we've done this. And I do find it a little bit unethical and a little bit pushy. But I do wonder whether this is the better way of doing it versus what I'm doing, because I'm quite new to this. So I wonder what your take on it is.
I am very similar to you, where I can't stand it. If we're doing a pre-call and somebody's selling me something, I probably won't even go on the podcast. I have always been a proponent of, I'm going to give away as much free stuff as humanly possible, with the understanding that if somebody needs help, they'll probably want to reach out to me anyway, because I've already added so much value. Yeah, I think it's short-sighted. One, because it's very clear that that person does not care about their audience. And it's going to be very hard to make a successful podcast if you don't care about your audience. And number two, the podcasting industry is very small. The community is not large. It seems like it is, but it's pretty small and pretty tight. If word gets out that, oh yeah, this person just does pre-calls so they can sell people, if enough people find out about that, it's probably not going to be good. So I am in agreement with you. That's not the way I like to do it. It's happened to me many times, unfortunately, but I think that person's missing out on whatever opportunity could come. You never know. There's something intimate about sharing an interview with someone, right? You and I never met before this. This is the first time we've ever talked face to face like this. Who knows what could happen after a deep, meaningful conversation? So I am anti that. I think it's short-sighted, and I would agree. I think it's unethical, honestly.
Thank you. So what process do you suggest in terms of having meaningful one-to-one conversations that work both ways in terms of collaborations, and you never know what could open up as well?
As a host, it's your job to introduce the guest to the audience, and it's your job to create an opportunity for the guest. So it's always about what's in it for them as much as it's what's in it for you. One thing you can do that's going to put you above and beyond most people is do research. It's very clear, Lily, to me that you did research on questions, and it's abundantly clear. I feel very cared about. I don't feel like I'm just a number. Okay, this is my 9th interview of the day. Let me check the box. I don't feel that way. I feel really good. If you make the guest feel different than they have on other podcasts, they're going to remember you. I had the opportunity to speak at a very big mastermind recently with my friend now, Evan Carmichael. And we had the privilege of interviewing him in 2019, I think. And he gave us 20 minutes, and he said, I'll give you guys 20 minutes. And at the end of the 20 minutes, I said, all right, Evan, we'll let you go. I know you're up against it. You have stuff to do. And he said, no, I want to stay. You guys are really good. You did a lot of research. I love your questions. That ended up with the opportunity of us going to Toronto to interview him in person. Then he spoke at one of our events. Then he came back on the podcast, and then he invited me to speak with him. That all came because he remembered us as podcasters. So if I could give one piece of advice, go above and beyond. Just like you would do if you wanted a successful restaurant. You would know, oh, are you allergic to anything? That type of stuff. You'd go above and beyond, and I guess that's not going above and beyond anymore because you got to make sure people are safe, but you get the gist of it. Just going above and beyond. There's a big difference between a plumber who comes in and fixes your toilet and a plumber who comes in and fixes your toilet and then leaves your bathroom cleaner than it was before. Those are two very different experiences, and you're going to remember one plumber more than the other, at least for the right reasons.
Thank you. How important is branding for the podcast and its success?
It's super important the longer you go. I think in the beginning, everybody's worried about this has to be on brand and this has to be on brand. And I think it's important, but it's not as important as longevity. You could have the best branding in the world, but if you're not around in 5 years, it just doesn't really matter. It's very important, but I think people put more emphasis into that than they do sustainability in the beginning. So yeah, it's definitely something that's super important. Yes, focus on it, but you have to focus on staying around and staying in business. And in the beginning, for most podcasters, that's one-on-one conversations. I know there's a lot of people that have worked with us that have never been to our website. Having a website's important. It's all branding. But if you're having enough one-on-one conversations, there might not be a need for them to even look at your branding. Will it help with listeners? Yes. But it doesn't mean that that's the way that you're going to monetize. So yeah, it's super important, but don't put that over everything else, because even if you attract people and then you have bad audio, bad video, the branding is not going to save you if you don't have good quality content.
Thank you. What elements differentiate really highly listened podcast episodes versus some that seem to dwindle?
Usually it's getting right to the goods. So there's a lot of people that they'll start and they'll have like a 10-minute intro, and then they'll have ads, and then they'll like get into it, and then they'll have more ads. You got to get right into the stuff. You have to get right into the quality. You have to get right into the emotional pull stuff. Get right into the value, especially on YouTube. That's even bigger. That's one piece. The other one is making your episode either way too long or way too short. Usually way too long. So some people think that they just have to have an hour and a half episode because that's what a lot of the successful shows are doing. But just because they have those lengths does not mean that's what you need to do in order to be successful. That's a big one. Audio quality is a big one. If somebody tunes into your podcast and the first thing they hear is you sounding like you're talking through a muffled can, they're probably not going to stick around for very long, unfortunately. That's a really big one. And then I would say, if your audience recognizes very, very quickly that this episode is just not for them, whether it's a guest, whether it's a topic that you're missing the mark on, they're going to notice pretty quickly that it's not for them. Just as an example, I went on a podcast that was all about mindset recently, and the person asked me a bunch of questions about podcasting. That episode's not going to do very well, most likely, because that's not what their audience wants. Now, if it was a show about business owners and how to differentiate your messaging, that's a great topic. If it was about relationships and I'm talking about podcasting, it's probably not going to do well. So the alignment between what your what your listeners expect and what you deliver, that's another surefire way to decide whether or not the episode is going to do well or not.
Thank you. What other ways are there to increase listeners and watch time?
Yeah, that's a hard one because you kind of have to optimize for that. So one thing that works really well on YouTube is people will say, okay, today I'm going to talk about the top 5 ways that I made $1 million. Make sure you stick around. Number 5 is my favorite. All you're doing is priming the audience to say, hey, make sure you stick around to the end. You can do giveaways. You can do stuff like that. Hey, it's going to be at the end. But the simplest thing is to make sure that you're producing really, really high quality content. Because all those, what are you going to give something away every episode? You're going to go broke if you do that. Or you can only say number 5 is my favorite so many times before people start to say, okay, is the last one always your favorite? So I think those are all supplemental. But the origin, the true center of it all has to be quality content. It has to be, you can't really win without that in the long run. Everything else is supplemental. But if you don't have that, people are going to go. I would say those are probably the best things I could give.
Thank you. Well, how important is it to have a really good hook? And if it is, how can we achieve a really good hook?
Yeah, hook is super important in any piece of content, not just podcasting. If you look at social media now, you have a second, maybe 3 seconds to catch someone. So you have to have a valuable hook. My thought around hooks is it gets somebody to lean in, or if you think of it, if you have a pet, most likely a dog, I'm guessing, would be the number one. But if you say, hey, do you want to eat? And their ears perk up, that's what I'm looking for from a hook. So one of my favorites is, you'll never believe what happened to me this weekend. That example of what happened to you this weekend. I think a good hook is you stating a potentially controversial opinion That's one thought. The other thought is I think of it from like a podcast title standpoint often. I think a good title is somewhat hooky, and it's 60% certainty and 40% curiosity. So I am certain that I'm going to get something, but I'm curious to what the answer is actually going to be. So 3 ways to make $1 million, 3 things guaranteed to wreck your relationship. Okay, I know there's 3 things. I know they're going to wreck my relationship. What are they? I need to tune in. So it's something that piques interest. It's something that potentially creates FOMO, fear of missing out. And it's something that, yeah, if you were a dog, it would pique your ears up. If somebody said to you, are you ready to eat? You would say, ooh, that's always what I'm looking for when it comes to hooks.
Wow, I love that you said that because, my partner uses that phrase every single time anything happens. And when anything doesn't happen, he uses that as well. So I think that's why I haven't been bored yet in the last.
I would say your partner knows. Your partner knows what he's doing, Lily.
Okay, very good. So any other, you can say, juicy bits that you've left until the end that entrepreneurs should use in order to create $1 million podcast?
Yeah, I'll give you 5. Number 5 is my favorite. Let me see. It's probably going to be harder than you think. I'm one of those coaches where some people come to me and I'm just like, honestly, this isn't for you. If you think it's going to happen today, if you think the $1 million is going to happen this year, it's most likely not. Unless you've overcooked the turkey and your audience has been waiting for your podcast for years, that's a different story. That's a piece of it that I always like to throw out there. If you understand business, you're ahead of the curve when it comes to podcasting because all podcast is a digital business. You have to have lead gen. You have to have somewhere for them to go. You have to have meaningful offers. You have to have follow-up. You have to have organization, prospect lists. So yeah, it would be this. If you want your podcast to create business results for you, make sure you treat it like a business from the very beginning. Don't be afraid to delegate stuff that you shouldn't be doing if you have the capital to do it. Don't spread yourself too thin in the beginning and think you have to have 1 million different things. Start simple, start building momentum, and try to focus on getting a little bit better every day. And if you're around in 5 years, you'll probably be way more successful than you are right now. It's a survival game. If you can survive, you most likely will thrive eventually.
Thank you. How can you leverage storytelling in order to build such engaging, such exciting, such fun podcasts that people have no choice but to listen?
What I like to do is I come to almost every episode with a story. The thought is the lesson is important and the lesson is valuable, but the story is the way you actually get the lesson to land and be remembered. It might land in the moment, but if somebody doesn't remember the lesson 3 days from today, it doesn't really matter. So I think the best way to do it is to study really good storytellers, to study people in movies that are really good at telling stories, to listen to podcasts that are really powerfully story-driven, listening to audiobooks where the author reads their own book. It's going out there and finding people who are really good at it, and then you just starting the process. I think one of the internal things for people is a lot of people think stories are a waste of time. Well, it's not valuable. It's not the lesson. It's not teaching them anything. When you shift that and you pivot it and realize, I would say most of the lessons you know today are because you remember the story associated with them, then you start to value them more. And then when you value it, you understand how important it is to practice. And then a simple practice that worked really well for me that one of our mentors gave us, he said, every day when you get to the end of the day, take out a notebook and write down a story and a lesson. So what was the lesson from that day? And what was the story that initiated the lesson for you? Now you have a Rolodex of lessons and stories, and then you practice them. And you practice in real life too, right? You practice, I think that's what your partner's doing. You'll never believe what happened to me this weekend. That's the beginning of a really good story. And then you lean in and they can practice whatever. Well, I was at the mall and this person mistook me for Brad Pitt and it was this whole thing and I just couldn't believe it, whatever. Then you just practice it and you get crowd reaction and you kind of see how it goes. So yeah, testing it outside of the podcast realm is always a good idea too.
Yes, I actually really agree with what you said. And I find that stories are more memorable than the actual content and all the different stats and numbers and everything else that you've said. And what I find quite funny related to that is that years ago, I was listening to this guy, and he was the CEO of a company that was quite a large company that was selling toilet paper. And the only thing I remember from his speech was that creative people scrunch the paper when they use it. And that's pretty much everything. And I do think that's funny, considering he did share some really exciting, really extraordinary facts and, stuff related to marketing. But the only thing I remembered was this story. And it's because stories have a really interesting way of sticking around for longer than usual.
100%. Even in this, Lily, I don't know if I've really told enough stories. Like, it's hard and stuff like, it's hard when you're doing episodes on facts or like expertise, quote unquote, for lack of better phrasing, because you're even in this moment, I'm so focused on like, what are the top 3 ways? These will probably be the top 3. So that's a good lesson for me. Even in these quick fire, just hammer value, you got to inject some story.
Thank you. What's your message to entrepreneurs worldwide wanting to have $1 million podcast?
It's definitely something that you can do if you have a niche, if you have offerings and you're good at what you do. Don't wait. Don't think that it's too saturated. It's not. It's less saturated than you probably think. Podcasting is less saturated than business. So if you can make it as a business owner, you can make it as a podcast. So there's less competition than you think. And get comfortable being the face of your brand if that's what you want. Everybody now is kind of becoming a personal brand. Everything's kind of leaning into personal brand, and you're going to ultimately be the personal brand. And there's personality behind the personal brand. So I think if that's you and that's what you desire, start working on that now. And speaking is never going to go out of fashion. If you're a really good speaker and you can tell stories and add value, your business meeting is going to be way better anyway. So it crosses over into so many different silos than you might think. And you're going to learn so much about yourself. You might learn more about yourself than you learn about anything else. And as a business owner, it's always good to have self-awareness.
Thank you. You're not going to believe what happened. I had Kevin Palmieri on my podcast.
I appreciate it.
Follow us for more interviews with world's most influential business titans, providing you with the insights to awaken to your full potential, so you can get paid to be yourself, find true happiness, and manifest anything you desire.